The first crack of thunder split the sky so close, it rattled the old window glass above Julia Carter's head. The world outside was chaos. Rain lashed sideways against the sagging roof of their apartment. Wind howled up through the alley, and every shadow seemed to move when the lightning flashed. But inside, in the faded glow of a single lamp, the Carter living room was a small, flickering world made of blankets, picture books, and the steady thump of a German shepherd's tail. Julia, only 9 but already feeling older, lay on her side at the foot of the pull-out couch, knees tucked up beneath her chin. She pressed an open storybook to her chest and forced her voice to stay steady. Once upon a time, a little fox built a den in the roots of a tree. Ava's hand slipped into hers, clammy and small. Ava was 5, with flyaway curls and a voice that barely whispered anymore, not since Tommy had moved in. Now, each time thunder struck, Ava flinched like she was made of glass. Julia turned a page. Though she'd read the story so many times, the paper felt soft as cloth. And even when the wind blew, the fox knew it was safe, because he had a friend. On the floor, Bruno shifted, pushing his nose under Julia's palm. He was 5 years old and sable as the thunderclouds outside, eyes keen but gentle, a dog built for protection, not just comfort. He had belonged once to someone who needed him for therapy. Now he was everything to the girls. Watchdog, pillow, guardian. From the kitchen, a voice called, strained and rushed. "Girls, I'm leaving the number on the fridge, okay?" Lisa Carter's hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it tugged at her temples. She looked tired, uniform wrinkled at the sleeves, keys already in hand. She paused in the doorway, gaze flicking from her daughters to the silent shadow in the corner. Tommy's coat hung on the hook, heavy with the smell of cigarettes. Julia bit her lip. "Do you have to go tonight, Mom?" she whispered. Lisa's face cracked for a second. She knelt and pulled both girls in, her hands rough from long shifts cleaning houses. "I'm sorry, baby. I wish I didn't. I'll be back soon. You know I have to work. I'll bring pancakes in the morning." Ava clung to her, breathing in the scent of her mother's shirt, the only safe smell left in the house. Bruno stood, stretching, then circled behind Lisa as if to herd her back inside, to keep her with them. But the door opened, the wind rushed in, and Lisa slipped into the storm. For a while there was only the sound of rain. Julia counted each beat, waiting for the world to slow down. In the quiet, Ava whispered, "Is he coming home tonight?" She didn't say his name. She never did. "I don't know," Julia said, "but Bruno will stay with us. He always does." The clock on the wall ticked past 10. The apartment building creaked with every gust of wind, water dripping somewhere inside the walls. Ava's eyes fluttered, heavy with sleep and fear. And Julia wrapped the blanket tighter around her sister's shoulders. "Let's close our eyes. Let's dream about the fox, okay?" But she couldn't sleep. She didn't dare. Bruno, curled at their feet, raised his head every few minutes, ears pricked, nose twitching at scents only he could name. Julia watched him, her own chest tight with the kind of dread that didn't have a shape. Every time the headlights from the street flashed across the living room wall, she tensed, waiting for the sound of keys, for Tommy's boots on the stairs. Tommy, with his fast temper and loud laugh, who sometimes turned so quickly from friendly to frightening, Julia's stomach would twist in knots. Tonight, with Lisa gone, it felt like something inside the walls was watching them, waiting. Bruno lay very still, but his tail thumped softly each time Ava whimpered in her sleep. Julia counted thunder. She counted breaths. She listened for the safe, steady sound of the dog at her feet, and tried to imagine a world where storms only meant rain. Then, as lightning tore the sky in half, Julia heard it. The growl of a car engine grinding too loud for midnight. Tires crunched on gravel. A door slammed. Ava jerked awake, wide-eyed, clutching Julia's hand so tight it hurt. Bruno's whole body went rigid, tail down, eyes on the door. Julia heard Tommy's voice, low and rough, outside the apartment, cursing as he fumbled for his keys. The fear inside her rose so high she thought she might choke on it. She looked at Bruno, saw the dog's head lift, the way he moved to stand between them and the door, muscles tight, eyes bright and fierce. The hallway was lit for one terrible second by the flicker of lightning. The shadow on the other side of the glass was tall and broad-shouldered, swaying with the wind. Julia gathered Ava into her arms and whispered, "Stay behind me." But it was Bruno who stepped forward, silent and unafraid. His body a living wall between the girls and the storm, between them and whatever waited on the other side. And in that hush, before the next thunder, Julia felt the smallest flicker of hope. A whisper that maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone. The apartment filled with the sharp smell of wet wool and old fear as the door rattled in its frame. Tommy's key scraped against the lock, clumsy and angry. The storm outside masked the sounds, but not enough. The girls had lived with the rhythm of dread long enough to know the small cues, the uneven stomp of boots, the way the hallway light flickered under the door, the silence that came before a temper boiled over. Julia held her breath, pressing Ava behind her, both girls shrinking back against the worn sofa. The pages of the storybook crumpled beneath her trembling fingers. She could feel Bruno's warmth at her side, steady and tense, muscles bunched beneath sable fur. The door jerked open. Tommy burst through, the stink of liquor and cigarettes trailing him like a shadow. Rain dripped from his coat, leaving puddles on the linoleum. He didn't look at the girls right away. He only dropped his keys on the floor, hard, a signal, then shrugged out of his coat, tossing it over the nearest chair. The air changed. Bruno rose, slow and silent, body angling between Tommy and the couch. His ears were high, tail low but rigid. He didn't bark, didn't snarl. He simply stood. Tommy's eyes flicked to Bruno, lips curling into a sneer. "Damn mutt," he muttered. His gaze swept the room, restless, predatory. "You two still up?" Neither girl answered. Julia tried to keep her breathing quiet. Ava pressed her face into her sister's side, shoulders trembling. The room felt colder, every shadow sharper. Tommy crossed to the kitchen, opening the fridge with too much force. Bottles rattled. He cursed under his breath at the emptiness, then slammed the door. The apartment trembled with the sound. He turned, scanning the room, gaze landing on a half-full glass of water Ava had left on the table. He moved too fast. An open hand, a careless backhand meant to swipe the glass aside. Ava flinched. The glass tipped, water spilling in a shimmering arc across the table and down to the carpet. For a second, nothing moved. Tommy's voice sharpened. "What did I tell you about messes?" He took a step toward Ava, rage flickering through his features like heat lightning. Julia's whole body went numb. She couldn't think. She couldn't run. Her arms moved on their own, wrapping tighter around Ava. The room seemed to tilt, everything too bright, too loud. Tommy's hand swung out, clumsy, wild. He aimed for Julia, but she ducked, pulling Ava with her. The blow landed across Ava's cheek, sending her sprawling. Her head struck the edge of the table with a dull, sickening sound. Blood welled instantly from a split above her eyebrow, shock and pain blanking her face. A scream lodged in Julia's throat. Ava didn't move, eyes wide, breath coming in short, high gasps. Blood trickled down her face, bright and terrible. Something ancient woke in Bruno. The dog's stance changed. Tail straight, hackles raised, a growl rumbling up from deep inside. Tommy swung his leg, trying to shove the dog aside, but Bruno didn't budge. Instead, he lunged just enough to block Tommy's advance. Teeth bared in a silent, unbreakable warning. Tommy stumbled back, rage twisting into something sharp and ugly. He cursed, fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white. For one terrible moment, Julia thought he would strike again. At her, at Bruno, at anyone. But the storm outside grew louder, rattling the windows. The world shrank down to the circle of light around the girls and their dog. Julia's breath caught on every beat of her heart. Ava whimpered, her small hand clutching the hem of Julia's shirt. The blood on her face gleamed like a signal. Julia's mind snapped into focus. She had to move. She had to run. She grabbed the blanket, wrapped it around Ava, pressed her palm over the bleeding cut. "Come on," she whispered, voice shaking but urgent. "We have to go." Tommy's attention snapped back, furious. "Where do you think you're—" But Bruno moved again, blocking him, muscles coiled and ready. He didn't growl now. He stood, solid and unyielding, eyes never leaving Tommy's face. It was all the window Julia needed. She grabbed Ava, half carrying her, half dragging. The front door was still open a crack, rain slashing through the gap. She felt Tommy's shout behind her, felt the hot rush of air as he lunged, but Bruno was faster. The shepherd threw himself into Tommy's path, snarling, a sound that seemed to rise from the bones of the earth. The hallway outside was pitch dark, thunder echoing down the stairwell. Julia ran, bare feet slipping on the wet linoleum. Ava clung to her, blood trailing from her face, every step growing heavier. Bruno darted after them, pressing close, body low and focused. Down the stairs, into the lobby, out the door. Rain slapped their faces, soaking their thin pajamas. The cold bit deep, shocking them awake. Julia's arms burned with the effort of carrying Ava, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Behind them, Tommy's voice faded, muffled by the storm and Bruno's warning growl. She heard the crash of something hitting the wall, the sound of rage with nowhere to go. Outside, the world was chaos. Wind howled, rain ran in rivers across the street. Lightning split the sky, and every shadow seemed alive. Julia stumbled, nearly falling, but Bruno nudged her upright, guiding her forward. The streets of Willow seemed endless, flooded with water and darkness. She ran. She ran with everything left in her. Ava's weight grew heavier. Each breath tasted of fear and rain. Bruno stayed at their side, always a step ahead, checking the shadows, leading the way. And somewhere, behind all the terror and the storm, hope flickered. Bruno's steady presence, Ava's soft breath against her shoulder, the feeling of motion, of escape. It wasn't safety, not yet. But it was movement. It was choice. It was life refusing to surrender. The storm swallowed them whole, but the three of them, two sisters and a loyal dog, kept moving deeper into the night, away from the place where fear had made its home. And for the first time, Julia realized, as Bruno looked back at her through the rain, that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out after all. Rain battered Willow Street, turning gutters into streams, sidewalks into slick ribbons of danger. Each step away from the apartment felt heavier, not just with Ava's small weight, but with the ache of leaving behind everything that had ever meant home, even if home had turned into something they hid from. Julia's hair clung to her cheeks, the thin blanket around Ava soaking through, growing colder and heavier with each gust. Bruno led, head low, body tense. His ears flicked at every sound. A car door slammed far off, the distant wail of a siren, the hush of wind twisting through the sycamores lining the curb. He kept looking back, checking Julia, waiting at every corner. He didn't need to be told what to do. He understood. His world had narrowed to the safety of these two girls. They crossed the street, shoes slapping through puddles, thunder rumbling so close it seemed to shake the bones in Julia's feet. She clutched Ava closer, feeling the heat where blood had started to clot on her sister's brow. Ava's breathing came fast, shaky. She wasn't crying anymore, only shivering, every so often murmuring Julia's name as if checking she was still there. Bruno paused beneath an old willow tree, its branches draping low over the sidewalk, silvered by rain. He waited until the girls caught up, then pushed his shoulder gently into Julia's legs, steadying her. It was enough to make her pause, just for a heartbeat, and look around. Across the street stood a small church, dark now, but familiar. They had gone to the soup kitchen there some Saturdays, lined up for boxed mac and cheese and cups of orange drink. Its door was locked tight, lights out, but the overhang by the side entrance offered shelter from the worst of the rain. Julia half-carried, half-dragged Ava up the steps. Bruno stayed close behind, pressing in beside them as they huddled beneath the narrow awning. The world grew quieter in the sudden absence of water beating down on their heads, the rain falling in thick sheets only inches away, but not touching them now. Ava slumped against Julia's shoulder, eyelids fluttering. Julia peeled away the wet blanket, pressing it gently to the cut on Ava's forehead. Her own hands shook, numb from cold and fear. But she forced herself to work slow, steady. She wiped the blood away, checked the wound. It was deep, but the bleeding had stopped. Ava blinked up at her, silent, trusting. Julia's own fear spilled out in quiet, trembling breaths. She tucked the blanket tighter around her sister, tried to rub warmth into her arms, then pressed her own cheek to Ava's hair. She watched the water pouring from the gutter, the orange gleam of a street lamp warped by the rain, the shifting shadows beneath the willow tree where Bruno now stood guard, nose up, body taut as a bowstring. For a while they just breathed together. Thunder rolled across the rooftops, and in the hush after each crash, Julia could hear the soft whine in Bruno's throat, the gentle thump of his tail against the wet concrete. He watched the street, eyes never straying, as if daring the storm or anyone else to come closer. Time blurred, suspended between heartbeats and the endless storm. Julia lost track of how long they stayed there, only that her jeans grew stiff with cold. Her hands tingled painfully. She thought about knocking on the church door, but something held her back. Pride, maybe, or the fear of questions she couldn't answer. Mostly, she was just so tired. Bruno returned to her side, sitting close enough that his warmth bled through her soaked clothes. She leaned against his broad shoulder, feeling his breath, the steady rise and fall of his chest. She remembered nights, years ago, when her mother would tuck them in, reading by the glow of the bathroom light, her hand in their hair, a gentle song humming in the air. She let the memory fill her now, not to chase away fear, but to keep moving through it. The rain slowed. Not much, but enough that the world seemed possible again. Julia brushed the hair from Ava's face. Her sister was pale, lips blue, but her breathing had steadied. She'd stopped shaking, at least for now. A car passed, its headlights sweeping over the three of them. Two girls and a dog hunched beneath a battered church awning. For a second, the light caught Bruno's eyes, turning them golden. The car moved on, taillights fading into the storm. The silence after felt enormous. Julia knew they couldn't stay here. Someone would come eventually. Maybe someone kind, maybe not. She thought about where to go. No family nearby, no neighbors they could trust. The shelter was on the other side of town. Too far to walk in this weather. She checked the pockets of her jacket, found only a single crumpled dollar and her library card. She looked at Bruno, who looked back as if reading her mind. The dog stood, nudged her hand with his nose, then glanced down the street, toward the playground where the town's old rec center stood, a place where people sometimes gathered on stormy nights, where the lights sometimes burned late. Julia swallowed her doubt, pulled Ava upright and whispered, "We're moving, okay?" Ava didn't answer, but she tried to stand, holding tight to Julia's arm. They moved off the steps, back into the rain. Bruno led them down the sidewalk, past houses with windows glowing warm and unreachable, past the bakery where the scent of yeast and sugar clung even in the wet night, past memories of ordinary afternoons before everything changed. By the time they reached the playground, the rain had eased to a whisper, more mist than downpour. The rec center loomed. Doors closed, lights dim, but the covered picnic tables outside offered a kind of safety. Julia helped Ava settle onto the bench, then wrapped them both in the blanket again. Bruno circled them once, then lay down at their feet, head on his paws, eyes always open. In that quiet, broken place, Julia listened to the small sounds, Ava's breathing, Bruno's slow sighs, the rain slipping through the leaves above. She let herself drift, not to sleep, but to a kind of stillness, suspended between fear and hope, between everything they'd lost and whatever waited next. And as dawn began, faint and gray behind the thinning clouds, Julia understood. This night would mark them, change them, but they were still here, still together, still moving forward, one heartbeat, one step, one breath at a time. Night never really ended. It only shifted, deeper, grayer, heavier on Willow Street. Beneath the shelter of the rec center's picnic awning, Julia lost count of time. Her thoughts slowed, blurred by cold and exhaustion. Above, the rain had faded into a constant, whispering drizzle, thin streams running from the eaves and gathering in puddles beneath the wooden benches. Julia pressed Ava closer, both girls wrapped in the same soggy blanket, their jeans stuck to their knees, their socks long since soaked. Each time Ava shivered, Julia tensed, afraid the shaking would start again and not stop. She touched Ava's brow with the back of her hand, searching for fever, for anything worse than the pale and bruised dark skin. The cut above Ava's eye had crusted now, but her hair was sticky with dried blood. The picnic table's surface was cold, but Julia didn't move. She watched her sister's eyelids flutter, heard the tiny rasp of her breath, the smallest sound in the world. "I'm here," Julia mouthed, not daring to say it aloud. She stroked Ava's hair with numb fingers, each motion slow, measured, as if carefulness alone could keep fear away. Bruno had not left their side. The big shepherd lay beneath the bench, his body curled so his flank pressed against Julia's shoes. She felt the heat of him through the canvas, the steady rhythm of his breath. Now and then he lifted his head, scanning the empty playground, the street beyond. His ears pricked at the slightest sound, the crackle of a branch, the creak of a swing set in the wind, a distant siren that echoed off the dark buildings and faded into nothing. The world around them was hushed, the only light the distant orange pools spilling from street lamps, soft and unreal. Sometimes a car would pass, tires slicing through water, headlights sweeping the rec center's brick walls, but no one stopped. The world outside their small circle seemed impossibly far away, a different place, a different kind of life. Julia's mind wandered to old memories, mornings with Lisa in the kitchen, the clatter of a spoon in a mug, the hum of a kettle. Ava's giggles echoing off tile as they made pancakes for dinner on Friday nights. Those moments were gone, sealed behind a door she no longer dared to open. Now she clung to the smaller things, a warm nose nudging her knee, the rise and fall of Ava's chest, the way Bruno's tail thumped once, quietly, each time Julia shifted her weight. There were no words for this kind of night. Even the rain seemed to fall in silence. Somewhere after midnight, Julia felt her body sink into the numbness that follows fear. She let her head rest on the crook of her elbow, her arm draped around Ava, blanket pulled tight. The world grew thinner, less real, just a collection of sounds and breaths. Bruno shifted, standing slowly, paws clicking on wet concrete. He padded around the bench, sniffed at Julia's shoes, then pressed his head beneath her free hand. His fur was damp, his eyes gold in the shadow. Julia opened her fingers, feeling the softness of his ears, the solid reassurance of his skull. He stood there, patient, unmoving, until she stroked him twice. Then he circled back and lay down again, curling himself into the space between the girls and the night. Ava stirred, pressing her face into Julia's shoulder. Her breathing hitched, just once, a half cry, but she did not wake. Julia rocked her gently, humming under her breath, a tune that belonged to some distant, safer place. The rec center stayed dark. No other souls came. The sky, hidden by clouds, never lightened. At times, the only sound was the slap of Bruno's tail or the tiny, unsteady breaths of Ava sleeping. Julia's own eyes burned. She let herself drift, not into sleep, but into a place where time didn't matter. A place made of Bruno's warmth, the gentle weight of Ava's hand tangled in hers, the endless murmur of rain against the world. When dawn finally crept across Willow Street, it came as a faint silver glow behind the clouds. The rain was only a drizzle now, the world hushed and shivering. Julia woke first, cold and stiff. She tried to stretch her legs, wincing at the ache in her knees and back. Ava lay curled beside her, hair sticking to her forehead, lips parted in restless sleep. Bruno was already up, standing at the edge of the playground, tail down, nose lifted to the breeze. He didn't bark, didn't whine. Instead, he watched the street, silent, sentinel, as the new day hesitantly took shape. Julia checked Ava's wound, a little red, swollen at the edge, but not bleeding. She took off her own jacket, damp and heavy, and wrapped it around Ava's shoulders. She had never felt so old, so tired, or so certain that every action mattered. In the pale morning, Willow Street looked empty, yards dotted with fallen branches, puddles shining where the streetlights hadn't yet faded. A world washed raw by storm. The ordinary had become strange. Julia stood, pulling Ava gently upright. She pressed her lips to her sister's hair, held her a moment longer, then looked at Bruno. The shepherd met her gaze, ears flicking. He stepped closer, pressing his broad head into Julia's hip, anchoring her to the moment. In that thin gray light, as the storm's last sighs faded, Julia understood what survival meant. Not running, not hiding, but holding close. The world could still be cruel, but she was not alone. She had Ava, she had Bruno, she had the memory of warmth, and the promise, however fragile, of one more day. They started walking, 3 small shapes moving through the empty morning, across the playground, down the rain-swept sidewalk. No destination, only forward. The night was behind them, but the story was not over. The storm had changed them. The world was cold, but their circle, stitched by loyalty and love, remained unbroken. And that was enough, for now. The sky above Willow Street was a dull, pewter gray, the kind of color that made everything look washed and unfinished. Streetlights flickered out, one by one, as if the world itself was tired. Julia walked slowly, almost stumbling, one arm wrapped tight around Ava's waist, the other clinging to the heavy, rain-soaked blanket. Ava moved with her, feet dragging, every few steps stumbling and then finding balance again with Julia's gentle tug. The sidewalk was slick with mud and broken twigs, reminders of the night just past. Bruno led the way. His paws pressed small, certain prints into the soft earth near the curb. He walked ahead a few feet, then doubled back, waiting, circling, never letting the girls fall too far behind. When Ava's steps faltered, Bruno paused, nose bumping her wrist, a soft encouragement. His eyes scanned every driveway, every parked car, every open window. Nothing moved in the houses they passed. Curtains remained drawn. Porches were empty. Only a stray newspaper gone soggy from the storm tossed near a step. Julia remembered a time when these streets felt safe, when she and Ava would pedal their bikes in slow, looping circles while Lisa called from the porch for them to come in for sandwiches. But now every house felt like someone else's memory. The wind carried the faint scent of wet asphalt, mingled with wood smoke and the sharp tang of pine needles. Somewhere a dog barked, far away. Julia shivered, not just from cold, but from a kind of emptiness she'd never known until this night. A hollow where fear and hope tangled together. They walked on, block after block, Ava leaning heavier with each minute. At the intersection near the old library, Julia stopped. She helped Ava sit on a low stone wall, the chill of the stone rising through their jeans. Bruno hopped up beside them, sitting tall and alert, but pressing his body close enough to share his warmth. Julia checked the cut above Ava's brow again. It looked better in the watery light, the blood a dull brown crust, the swelling less angry. She reached into the blanket for her own damp jacket and wrapped it tighter around Ava, tucking the sleeves in with quiet care. Ava's eyes flicked up to her, searching, then closed again, her head resting on Julia's shoulder. For the first time since midnight, Ava's breathing slowed into the quiet, even rhythm of real sleep. Julia sat very still, afraid to break the spell. The world felt suspended. No footsteps, no cars, only the ticking of some invisible clock and the soft exhale of her sister's dreams. Bruno rested his chin on Julia's knee, eyes half shut, his entire body a silent promise. A sparrow landed on a branch nearby, shook the water from its wings, and fluttered away. Julia watched, something in her chest tightening, loosening, tightening again. She glanced at the front steps of the library. Closed. She wondered if it would ever open again, if anything would ever return to the way it once was. A car approached, tires hissing on wet pavement. Bruno's ears perked. Julia tensed. But the car passed, sending up a gentle spray. She saw a woman behind the wheel. Older, silver hair, a scarf tied beneath her chin. Their eyes met for half a second. Julia couldn't read what was in that glance. Suspicion, worry, or just weariness from her own troubles. As the sun finally broke through the clouds, just a faint gold smudge, the light caught in the dew on the grass, the puddles on the sidewalk, and even on the cracked, faded letters of the library's sign. Bruno stood, shook out his coat, then nudged Julia's hand with his nose. It was time to move again. Julia lifted Ava in her arms, surprised at her own strength. The smaller girl stirred but didn't wake, her breath warm against Julia's collarbone. She walked slowly, every step deliberate. Bruno pressed to her side. They made their way to the small park across from the elementary school. It was empty but for the echo of yesterday's laughter, the plastic swings still moving from the last wild gust. Julia found the smallest slide, a blue plastic curve sheltered by a maple tree, and settled Ava at the bottom, wrapping the blanket around her like a cocoon. She sat behind her, legs on either side, holding Ava upright with her own body. Bruno sniffed the grass, circled the perimeter, then returned, settling himself at the girl's feet. He leaned his weight against Julia's shin, sighing deeply, the kind of sound that fills a quiet with something like comfort. Time passed. Julia counted heartbeats, counted the number of cars that rolled by, counted the number of times she almost called out for help and swallowed the words instead. She watched the sun try to climb above the rooftops, its light weak but stubborn. Eventually, a distant bell rang. The church, calling to a congregation that might not come this Sunday. Julia listened to the sound, eyes unfocused, memory drifting to mornings when the world seemed small enough to hold in her hand. When her biggest worry was a forgotten homework assignment, or whether Lisa would buy the cereal with the marshmallows. Ava stirred in her sleep, muttered Julia's name. Julia hugged her tighter. Bruno shifted, resting his heavy head on Ava's lap. The three of them formed a circle, a fortress against everything outside, made not of walls or doors, but of muscle, breath, and the silent loyalty of a dog who never once looked away. In the hush of early morning, as Willow Street began to wake, Julia pressed her cheek to her sister's hair, blinked back tears, and let the world shrink to this small, sacred space. Two sisters, a dog, and the promise, renewed by every heartbeat, that as long as they were together, they could survive even the hardest storm. They waited, they breathed, they held on to each other and to the hope that somewhere, just beyond the edge of the day, someone might see them, understand, and choose kindness. And for now, that was enough. Morning took hold of Willow Street in slow degrees, the gray of night giving way not to brilliance, but to a kind of bruised daylight that left puddles shining in the gutters and the park grass matted and streaked with mud. Julia stayed at the bottom of the slide, arms wrapped around Ava, the blanket now dry only in the places pressed tight between them. She watched condensation gather on the plastic and trickle into a shallow pool by her foot. For a while, she let her mind empty itself of questions. Where would they go? Who would find them? What happened next? She counted the birds. Robins on the fence, starlings fluttering on the wires above the empty basketball court. Every so often, Ava whimpered, her forehead burrowing deeper into Julia's shirt, but she didn't wake. Bruno kept watch at the foot of the slide, tail curled around his body, ears swiveling at every distant noise. He seemed to know the difference between the heavy steps of an adult on a morning walk and the lighter scuffle of squirrels in the grass. When the world was quiet, he pressed his body closer to the girls, steady as stone. Across the street, the school parking lot began to fill with the cautious choreography of weekday morning. A teacher carrying a stack of books beneath one arm, a janitor propping open a door with his foot, a delivery truck backing up to the kitchen entrance. None of them looked at the park. Julia watched each arrival with a faint hope. Would someone notice? Would someone pause? Would someone care enough to ask why two girls and a dog sat in the playground before the bell? But no one did. The world moved in familiar patterns, as if after every storm, what mattered most was pretending nothing had changed. The minutes stretched thin. Julia found herself shivering again. She tried to smooth Ava's tangled hair, humming the tune of a lullaby she could barely remember, letting the melody fill the silence between heartbeats. Ava sighed, shifted, her cheek warm at Julia's collarbone. When Julia finally loosened her hold, Ava stirred, eyes blinking open, wide and searching, pupils slow to recognize daylight. For a moment, she looked lost. Then she saw Bruno, sitting so close his breath stirred the edge of her blanket, and she relaxed. Her hand found his fur, fingers sinking into the rough warmth. Bruno didn't move, didn't nuzzle or lick, but simply let her rest her hand on his neck, anchoring herself to the world. Julia pressed her lips to Ava's temple, felt the faint fever still hiding beneath the skin, and wondered how long she could keep them safe. Her stomach knotted with hunger, an ache old and sharp, but she ignored it. The town began to wake in earnest. The bell in the church tower rang once, twice. Far off, someone shouted a greeting. A door slammed. The hush of night replaced by the small, persistent sounds of a city starting over. Julia watched the flow of life, feeling both invisible and exposed. A man jogged by, earbuds in, breath steaming in the cool air. He looked past the girls, eyes fixed on the pavement. An older woman with a terrier on a leash paused at the crosswalk, the little dog straining to sniff the air, but she tugged it away, calling its name. Julia's heart squeezed. She wanted to speak, to wave, but no words would come. Ava sat up slowly, wincing. Julia held her steady, brushing the hair from her brow. The wound looked better, but her face was pale. Bruno shifted to lean against her, offering his warmth without being asked. Julia felt the strength in his body, the pulse of life, and held on to it. After a while, hunger became impossible to ignore. Julia reached into her pocket for the crumpled dollar she'd found during the night. She squeezed it tight, then straightened, helping Ava to her feet. The three of them crossed the street, careful at the curb, Bruno always a step ahead. They walked along the block to the corner store, a squat building with faded paint and posters for sales long past. Julia hesitated before the door, but hunger overruled her nerves. She guided Ava inside, Bruno waiting patiently just outside the threshold, nose pressed to the glass. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and cleaning solution, the air thick and bright. Julia kept her gaze low, steering Ava to the shelf of day-old bread and the wire rack of fruit near the counter. With the dollar, she bought a roll and a bruised apple, careful to meet the cashier's eyes just long enough to smile. The woman behind the counter barely glanced at her, but Julia felt the weight of every second. Outside, she broke the roll in two, gave half to Ava and the last small piece to Bruno. He took it delicately, jaws gentle as a whisper. Julia peeled the apple, offering slivers to her sister and to the dog, each bite a small mercy. No one spoke. The sun inched higher, glinting off parked cars and painting a faint warmth on their faces. Ava chewed slowly, then leaned against Julia, exhaustion returning. Bruno stretched out beside them, paws crossed, gaze scanning the street as if he expected trouble but would not let it near. Mid-morning brought more people. A mother with 2 young children in yellow raincoats, a teenager on a skateboard, a city worker in a bright vest sweeping debris from the sidewalk. None of them stopped. Julia studied every face, searching for recognition or kindness, but only found hurried glances, the careful distance adults keep from trouble they can't fix. The world moved on, and Julia learned again what it meant to be alone and to endure. But even as the ache in her chest grew heavier, she watched Ava's face soften in the sunlight, saw Bruno's eyes, warm and bright, meeting hers in a silent promise. As the noon bell rang and the playground filled with distant laughter, Julia squeezed her sister's hand, let her other hand rest in the thick fur at Bruno's neck, and whispered, not aloud, but in the secret language of those who have survived, "We're still here. We're still together. We will not disappear." And so, they waited for what would come next. 3 hearts sheltering each other in the calm after the storm. By early afternoon, sunlight crept uncertainly across the park, gathering in small, broken puddles on the sidewalk and painting faint shadows beneath the swings. The girls had moved to a bench under a patchwork canopy of leaves. The air freshened now, scented with earth and the last breath of last night's rain. Ava, quieter than ever, dozed in Julia's lap. Each time a car door slammed, she jerked awake, eyes wild for a moment, then distant. Julia stroked her hair, feeling the gentle rise and fall of her sister's ribs, counting each breath as reassurance. Bruno lay stretched along the cool grass beside the bench, his side pressed against Julia's shoe, a silent point of contact that meant more than words. Occasionally, a fly landed on his ear and he flicked it away, his eyes rarely closed. Sometimes he scanned the playground. Sometimes he watched the girls, and sometimes, it seemed, he simply listened to the quiet itself. The world was moving around them. Strollers trundled by. A group of boys played basketball with shouts that carried far. The bell of a distant ice cream truck spun a tinny melody through the air. Julia watched it all from behind the careful fortress of her own stillness, her stomach cramped with hunger again. The apple and bread were long gone. She tried not to think about it, focusing instead on keeping Ava warm and calm, her own body a barrier against the chill that still clung to the air. A city truck pulled up to the curb. A woman in an orange vest stepped out, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, clipboard in hand. She swept litter into a wide plastic bag, pausing once to stretch her back and glance over at the girls. Her eyes lingered for a moment, not suspicious, not unkind, just noticing. Julia felt heat rise to her face and looked away. But Bruno's tail thumped twice. The woman watched them, then moved on. Time slowed. The day unspooled into long minutes, each measured by the drift of clouds and the lazy circle of birds overhead. Ava's fingers traced patterns on the blanket, picking at the edges, her eyelids heavy. Across the street, the doors of the church opened, letting out a small flock of parishioners, mostly women, gray-haired and dressed in Sunday blue, who lingered to chat beneath the awning. Their voices carried, gentle and low. Julia's mind flickered to mornings with her mother, the hush of pews, the soft pressure of a hand in hers. The memory felt both sharp and impossibly far away. A shadow fell across the bench. Julia looked up, startled, and saw the woman from the city truck standing there, a paper bag in her hand. She crouched to Bruno's level, meeting his eyes before she met Julia's. "Hey there, buddy," she murmured, voice gentle. Bruno sniffed her hand, tail swishing, but didn't stand. The woman glanced at Julia, then set the bag on the edge of the bench, her face open, unhurried. "Fresh sandwich," she said, barely above a whisper. "Some fruit, too, and a bottle of water." Julia stared, unsure what to say. Her mind stuck somewhere between hope and suspicion. The woman didn't push. She straightened, gave a soft nod, then walked back to her truck and drove away. Ava blinked awake at the crinkle of paper. Julia opened the bag. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, a handful of pretzels, the kind of food packed for school lunches. There was a napkin, too, with a small, smiley face drawn in blue pen. Julia tore the sandwich in half, gave the larger piece to Ava, then split the apple and pretzels between her sister and Bruno. The dog took his share delicately, mouth soft around her palm. For a moment, the hunger faded. Julia chewed, watching the sun slip lower behind the steeple. Ava ate slowly, hands shaking only a little. When she was finished, she leaned into Julia, her head heavy on her sister's shoulder, lips smudged with apple juice. Bruno licked the crumbs from her fingers and settled once more into the grass. The church emptied, its bells ringing a slow, sweet melody. The world was both ordinary and sacred. Bicycles skidding on pavement, a baby crying, the sound of a broom against brick. As dusk approached, Julia's hope began to return, not as a burst, but as a steady flicker, something she could hold on to through the deepening blue of evening. A few people noticed them, an old man with a cane, a girl with braids, but no one stopped, no one questioned, no one threatened. Instead, kindness had arrived quietly, in a paper bag with a napkin smile. Julia pressed her cheek to Ava's hair and whispered a silent thank you into the cooling air. The girls huddled together, Bruno a silent sentinel at their feet, while the day folded itself gently toward night. They were still alone, but not invisible. Still hungry, but not forgotten. Still afraid, but less than before. And that, for tonight, was enough. The evening pressed in softly, deepening the colors of the park and stretching the shadows beneath the trees. The sun lingered, golden and thin, dusting every puddle and blade of grass with the last warmth of the day. Julia watched as the world slowed around them, the rush of cars thinning, children called home for dinner, windows lighting one by one in houses that seemed farther away than ever. Ava slept again, curled in Julia's lap. A strand of hair stuck to her cheek. Her breaths came deeper now, the kind of sleep that is part exhaustion, part safety. Julia stroked her arm gently, careful not to wake her. Bruno had shifted, moving closer so his back pressed against Julia's legs, sharing his warmth and weight like a living shield. In the park, quietness grew. The ice cream truck's tune faded down another street. The basketball game ended, boys' laughter trailing away in the dusk. A mother hustled her toddler along the path, shoes slapping against the concrete, never glancing at the bench where two girls and a dog sat in the deepening blue. Julia felt the slow ache in her body, knees stiff from sitting, neck sore from holding Ava, belly pinched from hunger, not quite sated by kindness in a paper bag. But underneath the discomfort, something softer glowed, a sense of having survived, of having made it one more day. A breeze ruffled the leaves above. The air smelled of cut grass and wood smoke drifting from a chimney somewhere down Willow. Julia's thoughts wandered, slow and tangled, looping through memories of old birthdays, a lost red mitten, a favorite book read out loud by her mother's quiet voice. Everything ordinary had become precious, even the cold and hunger, because they were together, because they had not been broken apart. As the last sunlight faded, Bruno grew restless. He stood, stretched, nose lifted into the breeze, tail wagging once as if testing the air. Then he padded to the edge of the park, looking back at Julia, ears perked, waiting. She understood. He wanted to walk the boundary, check the world, make sure it was still safe. She watched him trot along the sidewalk, stopping to sniff a bench leg, circling a trash can, pausing to gaze at the street where shadows pooled like water. No one noticed the dog, not really. He was just another shape in the dusk, a dark silhouette keeping silent guard. Julia felt comfort in his movement. How sure he seemed, how purposeful. He returned after a few minutes, shook the dew from his fur, and settled beside Ava again, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. The girls waited. They watched the colors bleed out of the sky, waited as the chill crept in, waited as the city settled into its nighttime rhythm of porch lights and faint televisions, of kitchen sinks running and the low drone of a lawnmower put away for the night. Julia's mind drifted toward morning. Would they have to sleep outside again? Would the woman in the orange vest come back? Would Lisa find them? Would anyone even know they were missing? The questions flickered, never quite forming into panic, but pulling at the edges of her heart. Bruno seemed to sense her worry. He pressed his head under Julia's palm, eyes warm, breath slow. She scratched the place behind his ear he liked best, and for a moment, the world felt smaller. Manageable, a circle of trust in a world too big to understand. Ava stirred, opening her eyes to the night, blinking at the dark. She did not speak, only sat quietly, leaning into Julia, letting the comfort of touch fill the space where words used to be. Julia wrapped her arms tighter, letting Ava's heartbeat remind her what mattered most. Down the block, someone stepped out onto their porch, whistling for a dog. The sound was thin, but Bruno's ears flicked in recognition. Just a neighbor, not a threat. A pair of headlights turned the corner, swept across the grass, then disappeared. The world was watching itself, going through motions, while in the pocket of the park, Julia, Ava, and Bruno breathed together, unhurried, unnoticed. As darkness thickened, Julia shifted, drawing the blanket higher over Ava's shoulders. She let her own eyes close for a moment, drifting not quite into sleep, but into a half-dream of kitchen light and the gentle weight of a dog's body beside her. She dreamed of pancakes and laughter, of Lisa's tired smile and the warmth of home. When she opened her eyes again, the stars had come out, soft pinpricks beyond the haze, distant but true. She whispered thank you to no one in particular, to the woman with the sandwich, to Bruno, to whatever stubborn hope kept her from giving in. They stayed that way, three against the night, while the city spun slowly around them, and as the darkness deepened, Julia realized they had something that could not be taken by fear or hunger, a place in the world, even if only on a quiet bench under the maple tree, with a dog who never looked away. It wasn't safety, it wasn't rescue, but it was enough to last the night. And somewhere inside that quiet, hope breathed, waiting for morning, waiting for a second chance, trusting that kindness, however small, always found its way back in the end. The stars faded without warning, replaced by a pale, bruised dawn seeping across Willow Street. Julia woke first, her cheek pressed against the top of Ava's head, the blanket wrapped so tight she could barely move her legs. For a moment she listened to the slow hush of Ava's breath, to the heartbeat beneath the small palm curled at her waist, to the faint, steady snore rumbling from Bruno, his chin resting on her shoe. The world was soft, uncertain, caught between night and day. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Julia didn't feel afraid of waking. She lay still, breathing in the scent of damp grass and the musk of dog fur, letting the silence settle around them like a warm sheet. The park was empty, dew shining on the swing chains, a few fallen leaves caught in the puddles. Far off, a crow called from a chimney. The first car of morning slipped quietly down the street, headlights low, radio muffled. The sky was the color of old wool. Ava stirred. Julia felt the tension in her sister's body before she heard her voice, small and uncertain. Ava didn't speak. She only pulled closer, her arms tightening, seeking safety in the shape of Julia's frame. Julia pressed her lips to Ava's forehead, silent. There was nothing to say. Not now. Bruno stretched, his long body shivering in the cool. He stood, shook the dew from his coat, then circled the bench twice before sitting beside the girls, eyes bright and serious. He watched the street, the trees, the world waking up again. Julia sat up, every muscle sore, feeling older than she was. Her stomach was empty and sharp. She wiped a smudge of dirt from Ava's cheek, brushed hair from her brow, then let her hand rest on Bruno's back. The warmth in his fur traveled into her fingers, steadying her. Minutes passed. The sun rose higher, slow and thin. The park grew brighter. A man in a blue jacket jogged by, sweat already shining at his temples. He glanced at the trio, eyes lingering for a moment, then moved on. Julia didn't mind. It was easier to be invisible, but they weren't invisible for long. A familiar city truck parked at the curb, tires crunching the gravel. The woman in the orange vest stepped out, a new paper bag in her hand. She crossed the grass, pausing a few feet away. Julia looked up, uncertain. The woman crouched down, meeting her gaze not as a stranger, but as someone who recognized something. A hurt she'd once carried, maybe, or a memory that never faded. She didn't speak at first. She only set the bag down beside the bench and offered a soft, quiet smile. Inside the bag, a banana, a small carton of milk, 2 cheese sandwiches, and another napkin. This one with a tiny blue heart. Ava's eyes brightened. Julia tore the food, sharing carefully. Half for Ava, a piece for herself, the smallest bites for Bruno. The woman watched, silent, hands folded on her knees. When the food was gone, Julia whispered a thank you. Her voice barely carried, but the woman heard. She reached out, brushing a bit of mud from Ava's sleeve, then looked Julia in the eye. You girls need somewhere warm? Her voice was gentle, without pity. Julia hesitated. Trust was hard, slow to grow after too many storms. She looked at Ava, then at Bruno, who watched the woman, tail wagging once. There was something safe in the woman's eyes, something solid. A slow nod. Julia's heart raced, but she didn't look away. The woman stood. Come with me, just to the rec center. There's coffee and heat and a couch if you want it. She didn't reach for Julia's hand, didn't rush, only waited. Julia rose, gathering the blanket and Ava in one arm. Bruno stayed close. They followed the woman across the park, sunlight catching in the grass, a slow parade of hope. The world seemed to shift, less threatening, more possible. Inside the rec center, the air was warm, thick with the smell of old carpet and brewing coffee. The woman led them to a couch near a window, fetched towels for the girl's damp hair, a bowl of water for Bruno. She poured 2 cups of hot chocolate, placed them on the low table, then sat in a folding chair nearby, close enough to be there, far enough not to crowd. For a long while, the girls and Bruno sat in silence, letting the heat work its way into their bones. Ava sipped the cocoa in tiny, careful swallows, eyes drooping with relief. Julia wrapped the towel around her shoulders, watched sunlight puddle on the faded carpet, felt the ache of hunger and cold loosen its grip. Other people drifted in, a janitor, a group of kids, an older couple walking with linked hands. Some noticed the girls, most didn't. One woman with silver hair paused, offered a gentle smile, then shuffled away. Bruno stayed alert but relaxed, head on Julia's knee, tail thumping whenever someone kind passed by. He was the center of gravity, the anchor in every shifting moment. The woman in the orange vest checked in often, refilling cocoa, bringing more bread, never asking questions that needed answers. Julia watched her move, the gentle care in her every action. She realized, slowly, that help could come softly, not as rescue, not as a grand gesture, but as an open door and a seat in the warmth. Julia breathed deep. She let the tension drain from her shoulders, just for a moment, feeling the safety settle around them like morning sun. In the hush of the rec center, she let herself believe, for the first time in days, that things could get better. That storms ended and doors opened, and sometimes, if you waited long enough and held on tight, someone would see you and know you needed to be found. Bruno looked up at Julia, eyes wise and bright. She scratched behind his ear, whispering thank you, not only for the food, the warmth, the couch, but for the dog who had carried them through the storm, for the stranger who saw past silence, for the chance to begin again. For the first time, Julia smiled back, small and real. She was still afraid, but less alone. And in that light, even the coldest night seemed a little less impossible. Sunlight slid gently through the dusty windows of the rec center, spreading golden shapes across the faded couch where Julia and Ava lay cocooned beneath a warm, borrowed blanket. The heat in the room, so plain and unremarkable to anyone else, was a gift to them, a softness they hadn't known in what felt like years. Julia woke slowly. Ava curled at her side. Bruno stretched across their feet, his breathing deep and even. For a moment, Julia didn't move. She listened to the muffled sounds of morning, chairs scraping, a low radio from the office, the gentle hum of someone sweeping the hall. It was the first time in so long that her body didn't tense at every small noise, that her first waking thought wasn't fear. She watched the dust motes spin in the sunlight, felt Ava's hand limp in her own, and closed her eyes again for a breath, letting the hush settle. Bruno was the first to rise. He shook out his coat and padded softly to the window, his nose pressed to the glass, tail thumping. The woman in the orange vest was back, refilling a tray of muffins by the coffee machine, her hair escaping its ponytail, her expression soft with focus. She caught Julia's eye, smiled, and nodded toward a tray. Julia understood. It was for them. She whispered to Ava, gentle, and the girls slipped from the couch, feet bare on the cool linoleum. Bruno walking ahead, already at ease in the routine. They ate in silence. Muffins with sweet crumble, 2 apples sliced into neat wedges, cocoa warm in chipped mugs. No one asked for their story. No one needed to. In the small kindnesses, food, a quiet place, the unspoken promise that they could stay a little longer, Julia felt something begin to knit itself back together. It was slow and delicate, this sense of belonging, built from the steady presence of people who asked nothing in return. Ava's cheeks had color now. She laughed once, quick and shy, when Bruno gently stole a bit of apple from her fingers. Sunlight painted her hair gold. Julia watched the color return to her sister's face and felt a weight loosen in her chest. The morning passed in small ways. Julia helped fold towels in the utility room. Ava colored with broken crayons at a low table. Bruno napped in a patch of sunlight by the door. The woman in the vest sat nearby, chatting quietly with a staff member, her voice low and musical. At times, someone came by to pet Bruno, to ask if the girls wanted more to eat, to offer a smile. Each gesture was simple, unhurried, never asking, always offering. When the girls grew tired, the staff found them a cot in a quiet back office, a soft pillow, a faded quilt with blue patches. Julia lay beside Ava, hand on her sister's back, the rhythm of her breathing a steady drum. Bruno circled twice, then settled at their feet, head resting on his paws. Julia watched his ears twitch in sleep, the corners of his mouth curving as if he were dreaming of running. Sometime near noon, the woman came in and crouched beside the cot. She didn't press for details, where they came from, who they were running from, why they were alone. Instead, she just placed a gentle hand on Julia's shoulder and said, "You're safe here, for as long as you need." Julia nodded. The words weren't magic. They didn't erase the memory of the storm, the ache of fear, the uncertainty of tomorrow. But they were real, and for now, that was enough. Outside, the day grew brighter. A few children from the neighborhood stopped by, their laughter echoing in the gym. Ava joined them, running awkwardly at first, then more confidently, her voice ringing clear. Bruno trotted after her, tail high, ears pricked, joining in the games, his bark blending with the sounds of play. Julia sat on the steps by the door, face tilted to the sunlight, the blanket around her shoulders. She felt the old aches, the heaviness of sleepless nights, but also something gentler, a quiet inside her, a possibility she hadn't dared to imagine. In the afternoon, a social worker arrived. Sitting with the woman in the orange vest, speaking quietly with Julia. She listened as Julia answered, as best she could, about her mother, about Ava, about how they came to the park. No judgment, no rush, just steady attention, a promise to help them find their mother, to keep them together, to give them time. The paperwork was slow, but the hours slipped by in a kind of peace. Ava napped in the office. Bruno stretched across her feet, and Julia helped sweep the kitchen floor. Her heart calm for the first time in days. When evening came, the girls ate dinner at a table near the window, Bruno curled between their chairs. As dusk fell, Julia watched the city lights blink on, listened to the hush settling over Willow Street once again. She let herself hope, not for miracles, but for the gentle return of ordinary things, a home-cooked meal, the sound of laughter, the safety of a locked door at night. And she knew, whatever happened next, she would carry this night with her, the quiet generosity, the open doors, the warmth of strangers who saw her, who chose not to turn away. Later, in the darkness, with Ava's hand in hers and Bruno curled close, Julia closed her eyes. For the first time, She wasn't afraid to fall asleep. The world outside was still wide, still uncertain, but inside this circle of warmth, of kindness, of the silent love of a dog who had never left their side, she found enough courage to begin again. The storm had passed. The hurt would take longer to fade. But under the gentle shelter of this borrowed roof, Julia knew they were no longer invisible. They had been found. And for tonight, for tomorrow, for as long as it lasted, they had a place to rest.